All right, let's go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining and welcome to our Sonar webinar entitled Everything You Need to Know About SonarQube. I'm Liz Ryan, your moderator for this webinar, which will be presented by Ann Campbell. Please allow me to quickly go over some essential housekeeping points before we get started. This session will last approximately 45 minutes, including Q&A. You're invited to submit your questions via the Q&A box in Zoom. Please don't use the chat box, try to use the Q&A box. We have two panelists joining us today, Lucas Greavy from our sales engineering team and Robert Curley from our product marketing team. They're tasked with answering as many of your questions as possible live during the webinar. This session will be recorded and we will send out a link via email in the coming days. Finally, at the end of this webinar, a short survey will appear on your screen. We welcome your feedback. Thank you in advance for your participation. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce today's presenter, Ann Campbell. Ann is a community manager at Sonar. She's a self-taught programmer who's coded JavaScript for early browsers. Think Netscape 3 and IE4, Perl, C, C++, and Java. Her software career has spanned support, documentation, coding, and product management. She's been a part of the Sonar community for 14 years and joined in 2013 after co-authoring the book SonarQube in Action. Ann, over to you.
Thanks, Liz. So as Liz said, I've been in the community for about 14 years. And when I was asked to take this topic, everything you need to know about SonarQube, it's a big topic. I decided to focus on some misunderstandings that I've seen recur over the years as people get up and running with SonarQube. So we're going to look at it from that standpoint. Now, I'm going to cover this in 5 sections. So first, getting SonarQube up and running, then how analysis works. A deep dive into that will help you understand what's going on as you configure your analysis. Then we'll talk about configuring analysis, then clean as you code, and then operating SonarQube going forward. So let's start with getting SonarQube up and running. Now, we've worked hard to make it easy to evaluate SonarQube. All you have to do is download the zip or pull the Docker image and spin it up, and it runs. It does that because we have embedded the H2 database for evaluation purposes. And when you're running with the H2 database, you see this warning at the bottom of your page. And what I want to make sure you understand is that this is not for production. If you see this warning on your page footer, then you are not production ready. If you try to move into production with this warning on your page footer, you will be sorely disappointed when it's time to upgrade because we simply don't support upgrading the embedded H2 database. So in order to upgrade, you'll have to lose all of the data you've accumulated in the H2 database, start over with an external production database. So let's assume that if you currently have this warning on your page footer, you're going to spin SonarQube down, configure an external database, and start it back up fresh. Now, when you do that, you move from an evaluation context into a production context. And when you make that move, you might have initial problems starting SonarQube back up. When someone tells me their server isn't starting, the first thing I ask is what shows up in your server logs, and in particular, the web.log, because if you have maybe not quite configured your JDBC URL correctly, or there's some problem with authenticating to your database, that's going to show up in web.log. Now, also, when you move from evaluation into production, we begin imposing the requirements that Elasticsearch needs to run well in a production context. And specifically, Elasticsearch wants to be able to open a minimum number of files and threads, and that's not always configured by default in all OSs. And so that's another reason your server might not start up, is that Elasticsearch requirements aren't met. And if that's the case, you're going to find that in es.log. Another thing you might see in es.log is that Elasticsearch simply will not run as root. So if you're trying to start SonarQube as either root or a user with root type permissions, Elasticsearch will refuse to start, and you'll see that in es.log. The final big reason that you might see your server not starting is LDAP configuration. Now we integrate with a lot of different IDPs, and most of those you configure through the UI. But with LDAP, it's old school. LDAP is the very first integration that we built, and it's configured through the basic server configuration. And having a problem with your LDAP configuration can fail your server startup, and that would show up in web.log. Now, if you're running into this, the best thing to do is get a third-party LDAP only client, use it to work through what your configuration should be, and then transfer that into SonarQube. Okay, so let's talk about how analysis works. Let's say that you've got your server up and running in a production context. Now it's time to configure analysis. But I want to give you an idea of how that works. So here is the big picture of that. This sequence diagram normally would be presented vertically, but it's so big it wouldn't fit nicely in the normal vertical presentation. I'm going to talk about this in sections, but first I wanted to give you an overall idea of what this looks like. So let's start with what happens before analysis. So we start over here on the left when the developer pushes a new commit into the SCM. Now, typically that's going to be some flavor of Git, GitHub, GitLab, Azure DevOps, etc. So Git says, okay, I have a change in the repository. I need to trigger the webhooks to send the notifications to the systems that you've configured to be notified, including your CI/CD. So that's Jenkins, Azure DevOps, GitHub Actions, etc. So then your CI says, okay, I have a change in this repository. I need to trigger the pipeline for this repository. So it says, hey, can I have the code for this repository? Your SCM says, sure, here's the code. Then your CI for compiled languages is going to run the build. So Java, C, C++, C#, Objective-C. And then the next step it's going to do is run your tests and collect your coverage reports. Now, I want to call out three pieces of this because they put important information into the workspace that analysis is going to need. So first, the code checkout. Yes, obviously, it puts the code into the workspace, and analysis is going to need that. But more subtly, it puts the SCM metadata into the workspace, and analysis is going to need that as well. I've seen people stumble with this when they try to check out in a different directory and move it or unzip a zip file to get the code. No, you want to check out directly into your workspace. The next important part of this is the build. So for compiled languages, running the build before analysis puts important information about the built project that analysis is going to need in order to do a full, thorough analysis of the project. And finally, if you have tests and you're running your tests, you probably want your coverage data to show up in your SonarQube analysis once it's run. And for that to happen, your tests and your coverage reports need to be done before analysis starts so that the reports can be fed into analysis. SonarQube will not run your tests for you. It will not generate your coverage information for you. It only reads these reports that are put in to the workspace before analysis. Okay, so the next thing that happens is that your CI kicks off analysis. So it triggers the Sonar scanner that you've configured for your build. And so the first thing the Sonar scanner does is it reaches out to the sonar.host.url value that you've configured to say, hey, SonarQube, what version are you? SonarQube says, I'm 10.5.1. And the scanner says, cool, we're compatible, let's get going. Please give me all of the analyzers I need to run. Tell me which rules I need and everything else that is needed on the CI side to run the analysis. So the SonarQube server returns all that data. And then locally on the CI side, the scanner is going to execute all the rules. It's going to examine every single file and collect the file level metrics such as lines of code, etc. It's going to read in those coverage reports, and it's going to read that blame data from the environment that we got with the checkout. So we use that blame data to understand which lines of which files are new, who issues should be assigned to, and so on. Once it has all of that data, it's going to bundle it up in a zip, and it's going to post that zip to the SonarQube server. Now, I want to call out here 2 potential points of failure. The first one is this initial call to the server to get the version. Because if you have misconfigured your Sonar host URL or forgotten to configure it, then this call is going to fail. So this is a really early warning, fail fast kind of thing to take a look at that configuration. The other point of failure, potential point of failure, is here when we post the analysis report, because up to this point, all of the interaction with the SonarQube server has been through GET calls. At the end here, we switch to a post call. And sometimes what we see is that there's a proxy in the middle that either won't allow a post payload, or more commonly, there is a size limit on the post payload. And so that usually manifests as someone saying, hey, suddenly my analysis stopped working and it was working fine for months and now it's broken. Or it used to work fine and now it fails intermittently. And what that is that the size of the project and thus the size of the analysis report has grown over time to finally trip over the threshold of the payload size that's allowed by the proxy. So if you see that, talk to your network folks. They should be able to change that limit and help you out. Okay, so at this point, the CI side analysis is complete, but analysis overall is not yet complete. So what happens, we post the analysis report to the SonarQube server. SonarQube receives that report and it queues it for processing in turn. When it's that report's turn, that report is popped off the queue, unbundled, and we store the issues, we store the file level metrics, and then from those file level metrics, we're going to calculate the aggregate metrics. So we already know on the CI side how many lines are in each file. From that, we calculate how many lines total are in the subdirectory, and then in the directory, and then in the module, and on up to the project. So all of that gets stored and the project updated. And at that point, server-side analysis is complete. But we're not quite done. This next step is where we tell all of the other systems the status of the analysis. So in a PR analysis, this is where the PR is decorated in the DevOps platform, Azure DevOps, GitHub, what have you. This is also where the webhooks are called to notify other systems. So this is where Jenkins gets the quality gate results. This is also when the other systems get the notification that analysis is complete and what the quality gate status is. So at that point, analysis is complete overall. So now let's talk about configuring your analysis. The watchword here is use the right tool for the job. We've worked really hard to give you tools to make it easy for the popular configurations, for the popular integrations. So we've built something for GitHub Actions, Azure DevOps, et cetera. So if we have built an integration for your system, please install it and use it. In the long run, it's going to make your life much easier. Similarly, we have built scanners, Sonar scanners for particular build systems. Now, depending on the DevOps platform you're using, you may not be able to choose your scanner, but if you do have a choice of scanner, pick the one for your build system. So if you're building with Maven, use the Sonar scanner for Maven. If you're building with Gradle, use that scanner, and for .NET. Now, for everyone else, you're going to use the Sonar Scanner CLI, and you will still be well served with it. You just will have to do a little bit more configuration than the other folks. And finally, use the onboarding. So once you have installed the integration for your DevOps platform, once you have installed the Sonar scanner you need to use, then it's time to start configuring your projects. Now, the projects page in SonarQube will invite you to import or create your projects through the UI. When you do that, there will then be a wizard to guide you through the initial analysis configuration. Go ahead and use that, and that's going to do most of the work for you. So now let's talk about analysis parameters. That initial configuration gives you a set of analysis parameters to put into your pipeline. And I want to talk about analysis parameters because if you look at the documentation, and by the way, we have excellent documentation, and I can say that because I'm no longer responsible for it. We have a full-time professional documentation team, and they have done an excellent job. And if you look at the documentation and you look at the analysis parameters page, you are going to see literally dozens and dozens and dozens of parameters. And I have seen people in the past take that as a to-do list. They go down the list and seem to think that they need to provide a value for every single parameter. And I want to make sure today that you understand that that is simply not the case. Really, less is more here. So let's talk about what's actually needed to configure analysis. First, there are 3 values that you must provide for every analysis. The first is sonar.host.url, and you're going to provide this at the global level if you're using Azure DevOps or Jenkins. For everyone else, you're going to provide this at the project level through either the sonar.host.url parameter or a sonar_host_URL environment variable. This tells the scanner where SonarQube is. The second you must provide is the sonar.project key parameter, and this tells analysis what project is being analyzed. And the third is the sonar.token parameter or the sonar_token environment variable. And this tells analysis who you are and proves that you do actually have permissions to analyze the project you're trying to analyze. And if you're in Azure DevOps, that one is also configured at the global level. Now, beyond that, you might want to provide your coverage report to analysis. This is that one of those things that pre-analysis we seeded into the workspace. You're going to do that with a parameter named something like sonar dot, the name of the language, dot coverage, dot report paths. Now, this is a general pattern, and it varies a bit by language and by coverage engine. So please go check the docs to get the exact spelling for your language and coverage engine. Now, if you have coverage reports, that implies that you have both source files and test files in your project. If you're using the Sonar Scanner CLI, you need to manually differentiate which is which, and you're going to do that with sonar.sources and sonar.tests. Now, these aren't absolutely necessary because sonar.sources defaults to dot and sonar.test defaults to nothing. So if you don't provide these values, then what you're telling analysis is that everything in the directory that analysis was kicked off from is a source file. And that may not be what you want if you've actually got tests in your project. If you're using one of the build system specific scanners, then you don't actually have to provide this. The scanner reads these values from your build environment. But if you're using the Sonar Scanner CLI, this is one of those extra pieces that you have to do manually. Now, beyond that, there are a couple of parameters you might additionally want to specify. So by default, SonarQube is going to use your sonar.project key value as the display name in the UI. If that's not visually appealing, then you may want to provide a pretty name using sonar.project name. And you would need to do this if you're using the Sonar Scanner CLI or the Sonar Scanner for .NET. If you're using the Sonar Scanner for Maven or Gradle, it's going to read that out of your build environment. Additionally, if you have run extra analyses before the SonarQube analysis, then you may want to push those results into your SonarQube analysis. And you're going to do that with a parameter that's something like sonar dot, the name of the language, dot, the name of the analyzer, dot, report paths. Again, this is a general pattern that it varies in specifics, so go check the docs for your exact spelling. And finally, depending on which CI you're using, you may need to specify sonar.qualitygate.wait equals true. And what this does is make your pipeline wait for that very final step of analysis where we notify all the external systems before it proceeds with the rest of your pipeline. Because if your quality gate fails the analysis, then you may not want to proceed with the rest of the pipeline. And so this parameter is what allows you to wait for that final step of analysis get the results, and then make the decision. Beyond parameters, there are a couple more things you can configure, but again, less really is more here. So for every single language in SonarQube, there is a default built-in Sonar Way profile for the language. And we've worked really hard and continue to work hard on an ongoing basis to make sure these Sonar Way profiles are very much sane defaults. Our goal here is that when you analyze any given project with the Sonar Way profile, 99% of the time, the developers of that project are going to look at the results and go, yeah, that makes sense. So these should be non-controversial defaults. Yes, you can tune your quality profiles, but this is not something that I would put on the short list of things to do soon. Similarly, you can configure your quality gate, but there is a default built-in Sonar Way quality gate. It focuses entirely on new code, and by using that new code quality gate, you really can get a good experience with SonarQube in general. Now, that sort of leads me into talking about the clean as you code methodology. This is something that is not entirely intuitive for most people. And so I want to spend some time talking about what it means, how it works. So let me start by saying that when you run the initial analysis on any given project, older than maybe 3 months, that first analysis usually turns up thousands of issues. If it's a really legacy project, it might have very little or maybe zero code coverage, high duplications. And the almost instinctual reaction of most project maintainers is to go, okay, I got to find time to do all this work because I've got to clean up all these issues. And what we say to you is that, no, you really don't. You really don't have to do that. Now, if analysis has turned up some severe security problems or, a null pointer dereference in your overall code base, yeah, you probably want to get those fixed. Beyond those immediate things, you really can ignore the problems in old code. Instead, what you should be doing is focusing on the new code. Make sure that the code you check in today has zero issues, high test coverage, and minimal duplications. SonarQube is built to help you do this. So the project homepage focuses on new code. The default quality gate is going to fail if you don't meet those criteria on new code. And beyond that, you really can ignore the problems in old code. And over time, the quality of the overall code base will really take care of itself just by making sure that the code you write today is clean. Now, I understand that this sounds like a fairy tale, so I want to offer you some proof. There's a project out there, not from us, called the Git of Theseus. And you can point it at your code base and it will generate graphs for you that show how long code added in a given year remains in the code base. So this is the Git of Theseus graph for SonarQube itself. It starts in 2010 when the project was moved to GitHub, and it ends about August of last year when we generated this graph. I was too lazy to generate a new graph. So what we're seeing here is the code that was added in each year and how long it stayed in the project. So all of this red is the code that was present in the code base at the end of 2010. So here at the end of 2010, we had about 400,000 lines of code in the code base. And then this cyan is the code that was added or updated in 2011. And then this sort of bluey purple is what was added to the code base in 2012, and so on. Now, I want you to imagine that this is your project. And imagine that on January 1st of 2013, so that's this bright green here, that you and your teammates looked at each other and agreed that from that day forward, you would clean as you code. So from January 1st, 2013, you all agree that no one on the team is going to add new issues in code. You're not going to check anything in with new issues. You're going to make sure that everything you check in today has high coverage and low duplications. And that's it. Just in the normal course of fulfilling business requests, you're going to make sure that the code you check in today is clean. So imagine you did this on January 1st of 2013. That means that everything that's bright green is clean code. Everything that's pink is clean code. Everything that's pale green is clean code. So look what happens here by the time we generated this graph. Almost everything in the code base, almost all of the 900,000 lines of code is clean. Yes, you probably have some lingering problems in this red, cyan, and blue code. But today, look what a tiny percentage of the overall code base that is. Everything else is clean. Clean code, clean as you code, really does work. And this is the proof. Okay, I'm going to get off my soapbox. Moving on. What do you need to do operating SonarQube going forward to keep your SonarQube instance healthy and happy? Now, I want to start with some license questions because this is one of the things that people get a little confused about. So first of all, you do not use up your license by reanalyzing the same code. Let's say that I have a license for 100,000 lines of code, and I have a project that's 10,000 licenses, and I analyze that project. I've just used 10,000 lines of code. Let's say that I've analyzed that project 4 more times. So I've analyzed that project a total of 5 times. Of my license, I've used up 10,000 lines of code. We feel it's a best practice to analyze every single commit. We are never going to do anything to incent you not to do that. So you cannot use up your license by reanalyzing the same code. So the next thing I want to talk about is the license lines of code and how they're counted. Because I've had people who go down the projects page and they get the lines of code that are listed on that page for each project and they add them up and they come to me and they say, why doesn't this total match what I see on the license page? Well, the license lines of code are counted by the largest branch in each project, and that may not be the main branch. The projects page shows the statistics for the main branch of your code, which is not necessarily the largest branch of your code. Now, if it's important to you to figure this out, there is a web service for you. So go to your page footer. In the page footer is a link to the web API. Click through on that. There's a search bar, search for the word license, and it will bring up the web service that will give you exactly the information you're looking for. And the last thing I want to cover here is that licenses are for editions, not versions. So every once in a while, I'll tell someone you need to upgrade, either because they're on a very old version or they want a feature that's only in the newest versions. And they say, but Anne, I can't upgrade. My license is for 7.9. No, we want you to upgrade. We are never going to do anything to incent you against upgrading. So you are licensed for Developer Edition in 7.9. Please don't go backwards, or 8.9, 9.9, 10.0, 10.1, 10.2, all the way through. You are licensed for every single version with Developer Edition or Enterprise Edition or Data Center Edition. Now, is there regular maintenance that you need to do to keep your SonarQube server happy and healthy? Basically, no. You want your database administrator to do the database administration stuff to keep the database happy. You want to make sure that you have enough free file space on the SonarQube host so that SonarQube can write out its logs. And that's it. Beyond that, all you really ought to do is stay up to date with the active versions. So whether you're on the LTA train or the latest, when a new version comes out, upgrade. So for LTA, that means picking up the point releases. If you're on 9.9 and we release 9.9.12, make sure you upgrade to that. If you're currently on 10.5, make sure that when 10.6 comes out, you upgrade to that. And I want to say pick up the point releases. So specifically, those are going to be the only releases you're picking up for the LTAs until the next LTA comes out. But if you're on, for instance, 10.5 right now, 10.5.1 is the latest. Pick up those point releases. Now, I've seen people who are reluctant to do these minor upgrades because they're afraid of regressions or functionality changes. They feel like they have to do a lot of testing to test the point release. What I want to say to you is that we don't put out point releases that change functionality unless the bug we're fixing is in the functionality. So the point of point releases is to fix bugs, to fix security problems. These are really low risk upgrades. You should always do your best to pick up the point releases pretty much as soon as they come out. Now, when you do an upgrade, you do want to make sure that you back up your database before you do that upgrade. Most of an upgrade is updating your SonarQube database schema for the new version. And there's no rollback for that. Not that people need to roll back very often at all. But if for some reason you do need to roll back, the only way to do that is by restoring the backup that you took before you did the upgrade. So make sure you do the backup. And finally, after you've done the upgrade, there are some database cleanup steps that we recommend. They vary a little bit by database engine, so I'm not going to go into them here, but they're in the documentation. So point your DBA at the docs, make sure they run those steps, and that's it. All right, so what are the takeaways? What are the key points that you should remember from this webinar? First, when you're getting SonarQube up and running, make sure you configure an external database. And if you have any questions about what's going on, the server logs are your friends. Now, if you look at the server logs and they're not showing you much, then you can go into the admin interface and bump up the log level briefly. Those logs get very big, very fast. Recreate your situation and then bring the log level back down. For analysis, analysis happens in stages, and what happens before the actual analysis is important to analysis. For configuring analysis, use the integrations, the scanners, the wizards to get the configuration, to get the setup for your system, and really less is more here. Clean as you code, really, just focus on today's code. Over time, overall quality will take care of itself. And going forward, take the upgrade. And at this point, I'm going to turn it back over to Liz.
Thank you, Anne. I appreciate that. That was great. As we move into our Q&A and we gather questions on our side of things, we had lots of questions in the chat box. So thank you for that. And hopefully we've answered lots of your questions, but left some for Anne. I briefly want to share that we have 2 upcoming webinars you can attend while we gather those Q&A. If you work in the federal sector, please join us for our next webinar tomorrow. It's SonarQube Enterprise Edition for federal agencies. It's presented by Colin Mueller. You can register today with a link in the chat. You can also join us for another webinar, Security and Design, How Implementing Good Quality Methodology Delivers Better Software Security, presented by Jonathan Slaughter on Wednesday, July 17th. You can also register today with that chat in the link. And now you'll see a brief poll to indicate if you'd like to learn more about our solutions. And please feel free to answer or not, totally up to you. As a reminder, a short survey will also appear after the Q&A, and we greatly appreciate your feedback just on the webinar in general, what you'd like to see in the future. We love hearing from you. Okay, let's see what questions we have. I'll start with a few here. Anne, are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. What are some things to look for when coverage is 0%?
Okay, so I wish I could ask a follow-up question on that. So if you're trying to raise a 0% coverage, then what to look for is, again, clean as you code. Make sure that the code that you check in today is covered. Now, I have been in the situation of working in a legacy code base with, 1,000-line classes and methods that were 200 lines long. And it's very difficult to, tackle that coverage situation. What I would urge you to do at that point is look at extracting the part of the code that you're working on today into another method. Then you can cover that method. And that does two things. It gets today's code covered, and it also starts to break down those giant monolithic methods so that over time the code base becomes easier to work in. Now, if this is a question about my coverage is coming up 0, even though it shouldn't be, that's kind of an in-depth technical debugging thing that I would ask you to come to the community and pose.
Great, thanks, Anne. We've got a few more here. What is PR decoration, especially in Azure DevOps?
Okay, so let me start by mentioning that PR decoration is a commercial feature. It starts in Developer Edition and above. And in commercial editions, we allow you to analyze pull requests. So what we'll do there is analyze just the code that was changed. And so you get an analysis of just today's code, just your new code. And then if everything's configured correctly, and if you've used the wizards and the integrations, it probably is, then we go back into that PR in Azure DevOps. And we're going to annotate the PR in Azure DevOps with your quality gate status. So did I meet the requirements of my quality gate? And if I did not, how many issues did I introduce? What is my code coverage? And so on.
Okay. We've got lots of questions, so we'll try to get it to as many as we can. The next one, how do I get results when using sonar.quality.gateway.true?
So I think this is about sonar.qualitygate.wait equals true. So you're going to use that in the context of GitLab. I think there might be somewhere else where you need to set that up. The exact details of that integration are not coming to my mind. It's in the docs how to get this set up. So check the docs, and if you have questions about it, come ask us in the community.
Perfect. Anne used the term server logs in her presentation. So what did she mean if there are no logs?
If there are no logs, then your server probably didn't start up. So if your server did start up, because SonarQube won't start up if it can't write its logs. And it's not one of the things I covered because it's a very rare circumstance. But if you look in your SonarQube directory, there should be a logs directory, and the files in that logs directory are what I called the server logs. SonarQube runs as under the hood 3 separate processes. So there's an overall log, which is sonar.log, and then each of the 3 processes has its own log, the web log, the CE log, and the ES log. And those processes do their logging there. And those are the logs that I was telling you to check at the beginning if your server isn't starting up.
Okay. This one's a little bit more general. I think it's good to cover for those that are a little less familiar with Sonar in general. What's the difference between SonarQube and Sonar Cloud? Do both provide the same features?
So SonarQube and Sonar Cloud started as identical twins. Over time, they evolved to be sisters. Today, they're more like cousins, but we're trying to pull them back into being sisters. But the marketing people listening are probably all cringing and throwing things at their screens at this moment. So in general, at a base layer, yes, they provide the same features. They both provide analysis of all the same languages. They both provide PR analysis. Where it differentiates a little bit is that Sonar Cloud is a little bit more specialized for the cloud environment, whereas SonarQube is more specialized for an enterprise environment. So you're going to find today more reporting, for instance, in SonarQube. Now, I said we're working to bring these back to being more like sisters. So we're adding some of that enterprise functionality into Sonar Cloud as we speak. So today, the differentiator, I would say, is do you need to manage your own infrastructure? Pick SonarQube. Do you want in-depth reporting right now today? Pick SonarQube. If you're a little bit more laissez-faire about it and you can wait for the reporting, even though you want it, then you might look at Sonar Cloud.
All right. Let's start with another one. How do I find web.log and the rest of my server logs? I think we kind of covered that a little bit when we were talking about server logs.
So look in the SonarQube directory. There should be a logs directory there, and those are the files in that logs directory.
Okay. You talked about focusing on new code. What exactly is new code by Sonar's definition?
Yeah, I kind of glossed over that, didn't I? So we make a distinction between new code and overall code. And for us, typically, new code is everything that has been touched. So every line of code that has been added or edited since the last production deployment. Our idea here is that each new deployment to production should be at least as good as the previous one. And so that's why we talk about don't add issues on new code, right? So what's in production now doesn't have this issue that you might have added today. So make sure you take that issue back out so that your new code that the changes that you deploy to production are at least as good as what was already there.
Okay. Let's see. I know we're rapid fire answering questions as they come in. Let's see if there's anything else we can get to before we close things out. Okay, I think I'm going to stop there. I know we've got lots of questions, lots of answers, a few that we'll follow up on. In general, I think we did a good job covering what we could today. Thanks, Anne, again, for presenting us with this webinar, and thanks to all of you that posed some really great in-depth questions. Hopefully we got to your question. If we didn't, please visit our community and you can send those questions there and interact with Anne again in our community. Also, you can please visit sonarsource.com to see more information on our products, and as far as Clean as You Code goes and that new code definition, you can find more information there. Thank you in advance for providing your feedback via the short survey that'll appear on your screen as our webinar ends, and we'll see you all soon. Thank you.